Hello, everybody. So we're going to jump straight into it. The conversation of the hour is about the fate of Ethereum and whether Ethereum is going through an existential crisis. Okay? So I want to start by just getting an understanding of what are the views on stage. So first question, just give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Is Ethereum pivoting? Okay, all right. Explain. Is Ethereum pivoting? Yes. Explain why.
Well, I mean, the former direction was the roll-up centric roadmap and off-scaling or outsourcing everything to scaling via L2s. And that was the singular focus, right? It wasn't like they were like saying, we're also going to scale the L1. In fact, every time I said that we should do this, they would say, no, noob, that is wrong. We should actually, that's the L1 is for B2B sales or something like this. And so now that the direction has changed, that is the definition of a pivot, I would say.
All right, I'm convinced.
All right, you're in the middle.
I give up, actually. It is a pivot. Mert's right.
You changed your mind.
I changed my mind.
Pivot. Why?
Convinced me. It's a pivot.
Why?
I agree. Like, the definition of a pivot is you have one direction that you're pushing in, which is this very roll-up centric roadmap, and now it's like actually scaled to L1, which is right. I think it's a good pivot, but definitely a pivot. So.
Okay.
I think my nuance here is that this is semantics at the end of the day on the definition, but I don't think a refocus on changing the priority is the same as a pivot. Pivot is directionally you're changing things to. And I kind of say that with the context that I know of what's always been on the roadmap. And yes, the L2-centric roadmap was prioritized, but it was never set that we're not going to focus on the L1. It was just, this is not the key focus.
You say reprioritization.
So changing a priority is not the same as pivot because direction is not being changed, just the focus is.
So for the sake of this question, let's call it a pivot. Is the pivot working so far?
I'm sorry, what?
Is the pivot working so far? Show me thumbs up, thumbs down, sideways.
Well,
hold on. Is pivot working so far? Working so far?
I mean, they did it yesterday. They announced stuff like, oh, we're going to scale the L1 literally or 2 days ago or something. I don't know. The time zone was
yesterday.
And so, I don't know if you can actually tell if it's worked from that time horizon. I mean, I know we're in crypto, but I think it'll take at least 6 months to a year for you to really understand if it's working or not.
Okay. Why do you guys think it's working?
I think it's working because it is representative of the fact that we are taking competition seriously in the Ethereum ecosystem. So, there's been a kind of approach of like ignore everyone, do your own thing, run your own race, which is fine until someone's like way ahead of you, and then you're like, no, I'm running my own race. This is fine. And so I think that having to make a pivot or an adjustment or a reprioritization or whatever you want to call it, and
that's
doing
worse than content coin. Meme coin content.
We don't talk about that.
We should coin that. But yeah, whatever you want to call it, the recognition that you need to do something differently, that what you're currently doing is not working, I think is a good signal to the ETH community that everyone's taking this seriously.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of add on to what he just said, you actually can see faster decision making. You can see action being taken. And if you want to say, oh, well, the things haven't been deployed yet on the next upgrade, that's fine. That will need time. But in just the last 2 months alone, we've seen actual feedback being listened to and acknowledged and replied to. We've seen way more things immediately kind of make it to the next release. And things can taken out. And just you see the feedback loop actually shrinking. And that's a great sign of things are directionally going to the right place.
Okay. So what do we think is the cause of this pivot? Was it Solana that pressured Ethereum into pivoting? Is it the ETH BTC price getting to such a low, such a dark place that all of a sudden there's like this capitulation? Was it just a response to the EF being overly bureaucratic? What's your story of why this happened?
Why not both? I mean, I would say the EF bureaucracy thing is just downstream of everything else. That's a problem. When things go bad, you just say, oh, the foundation is doing this. That used to happen on Solana too. When Solana went to $8, everybody used to blame the foundation. And so I don't really think that's really the symptom or the cause. That's a symptom. In terms of this cause, I mean, I think, yeah, it's crypto, so people are upset about the price. There's always a different meme about the different charts and all this. And then I think there is the Solana factor as well. Like now that revenue is maybe looked at as something that's important for the first time in crypto history. And then you keep seeing the Blockworks guys publishing these charts on like, well, Solana has more revenue. And that wasn't the case before, same with volumes and all this stuff. So I think it's just both. I don't think, like Dankrad, for example, just based on his comments on public forums, he clearly is concerned about Solana and wants to scale, versus maybe somebody like Justin Drake is much more concerned about the price, right?
Yeah, I think Ethereum is a big tent, right? And it is hard to coordinate at times. And so, it does take time to focus the efforts in the right direction and change direction. But we've seen historically, go back to the old days of BSC, when mainnet was super expensive, it really did kind of catalyze this reaction of we need to push L2s. We really need to fix this problem. We need to lower costs. We need to get more block space. Now we're kind of seeing the unintended consequences of that, where we have too much block space. The value of block space is being captured at the L2 layer, not in the L1. And so we're now reacting to that. It has been probably slower than I think most people would have liked, but it's all of the things kind of cumulatively having this effect where people are like, okay, we need to do something. What we're doing is not working clearly, and we're going to make some changes.
Okay, Kartik, what do you say?
I think. I mean, the honest answer is that it's a mix of all these things. It's not just one event that kind of caused this. The way I kind of see what's happening is, effectively, we're at a point where we as a crypto ecosystem, not just Ethereum, spent a good half-decade in kind of getting the basic infrastructure right. And it got to a point where we could say that, hey, for the most common things you want to do, you have a basic guarantee that these things are possible and possible at this speed, whether it's TPS or storage or whatever kind of the bare minimum requirements are. And now that you can't blame the infrastructure for everything, you're going to have to start building things that people want and people want to use. And over the last kind of year and a half, we've seen other ecosystems basically get a jump start on that. And because of the L2-centric roadmap, you kind of saw similar attempts happen on the Ethereum side. It's just that now, while the L1 and the L2 infrastructure was set up in a good place, those L2 ecosystems were not good enough for those apps to flourish. And at the end of the day, people were just not happy about the fact that they can see that there's progress being made on other places, but not where they are. And
I mean, yeah, this is the unintended consequences, right?
Like exactly.
We created this very we were too successful. I mean, back in the day, when Optimism was first launching, I was pushing hard for let's all coordinate to a single L2
and make that the thing.
Make that the thing, and then that didn't work, and then went from 1 to 2 to 1,000, which.
But now everybody's trying to do their own universe, exactly. And while they're on Ethereum, you kind of still notice, hey, look, how come those guys are being able to move faster? How come they have way more users and revenue than us, while we're kind of stuck on the next upgrade to help me do this thing, or this exchange doesn't work with our chain? And all those things become just noticeable. So you see smart founders, smart developers realize that, look, I'm getting half the things I want, even though the prerequisites are being met, and just not the destinations. And they're upset about that, and that's kind of the breaking point that they reached to start complaining a few months ago, and we kind of saw a faster change.
This uprising of let's do something.
Right. So one of the proposals that you guys alluded to was Dankrad talking about having an automatic increase to the gas limit on Ethereum, such that in 2 years it increases by 10x, and by 4 years it increases by 100x by default. So they could stop it, but that's the automatic thing that the client does. Let's say that happens. Let's say that Ethereum is going to 100x the throughput within 4 years. Do you think that's a sufficient answer to what we're seeing in terms of adoption on Solana or on Base? Kartik, well, let's start with Kartik. Do you think that's a sufficient answer on scaling?
I think I don't agree with the question. I don't think the question makes sense, because you're saying Ethereum, the protocol, should be responsible for making your app successful as a company. That seems like a pretty unfair expectation on a chain that is not trying to run your product. So if
what is Ethereum trying to do if not run applications?
No, but let's say you can now deploy a contract that's 100x bigger and have 100x more TPS, and you deploy an app and you're like, oh, well, I have 100x the capacity. Why aren't people coming? Are you going to blame Ethereum or your product? So I guess what I don't understand is like, what exactly are you comparing in this question? And I don't think that's clear. So I'm happy to answer, but I feel like this is not an apples to apples.
It's a gotcha question.
Yeah.
Look, I think the challenge is that we all saw what happened with congestion on L1.
Yes.
Like unequivocally, it became too expensive. We reacted too slowly. We should have gone into side chains or whatever faster. We didn't, and everyone got wrecked. And it gave Solana an opportunity to come and drive a lot of adoption, and they did. So the interesting thing about the question for me is, okay, should we scale block space by just increasing the gas limit? There is an unintended consequence, or maybe an intended consequence there, which is we're supposed to be able to run Ethereum nodes on toasters, right? Like that's one of our North Stars, weirdly. And so if we kind of decide to not do that, then all of the conversations we've been having, the talking points for the last 5 or 6 years, of which, like I remember having a debate with Kyle Samani where I'm like, Solana's bad because it's run in data centers, right? And I still kind of believe that a little bit, but like if you just go to a mode where you need a data center to be able to run a node for Ethereum and you can't do home staking, then we're really giving up that kind of decentralized ethos that was, I think, one of the biggest differentiators between Ethereum and Solana. So that feels like a dangerous path to go down.
You're against this proposal?
I'm not against it because I think we have to do it, but we need to also be mindful of it will turn us into the thing that we were railing against for a long time, right?
So what do you think Ethereum should do instead?
I think the proposal also presumes that we can get more efficiency as well, right? That we don't just jack it up and
Right.
increase the computational costs, that we can use ZK proofs and other things to like get back to the toaster era and allow toasters to run nodes. But it's not clear that we'll make that trade-off, right?
I do think there's a middle ground there, though, right? Because at the end of the day, increasing the gas limit helps you do a lot more per block, and that's, you definitely want that, because even if you have only L2s doing all the activity, you still need those L2s to actually settle on the L1, and the input has to still be handled. I think the compromise here is that, or rather, like one thing that I have criticized Ethereum developers, like the core devs for in the past has been, while it's great to strive for the fact that you want people to be able to run their own nodes and not have like a pretty heavy core requirement for hardware, you have to still update that requirement by the times. Like storage has gotten cheaper. Even the Raspberry Pis are now 3 times more powerful than they were 7 years ago.
We have more powerful toasters now.
For the same price, and it's okay to update the numbers. Like you don't need 2 gigs of RAM. You can assume everything as 8, even at market price and those capacities. So you can definitely do that, and I think it's a great setup to actually get people to start upgrading the hardware a little bit more. But the other piece is like you actually can test the theory without actually saying we're gonna like make a massive protocol change on just automatically update the gas price, and which is you can just reprice the opcodes. I can either 100x the capacity, or I can also say let's half the cost for every operation and reduce the size by 50% on what it's going to cost me, and see if that directionally makes a difference. And people are trying that. Like a lot of proposals right now are repricing the actions, and you can still get there. So there's multiple ways to do that. I think the thing that they haven't done is actually take action, and the push that's coming on to just protocol development now is that, hey, like it's actually okay to start moving fast and trying things,
Right.
and you actually have the ability to make changes more incrementally instead of thinking of them as massive multi-year long releases.
Okay, so these two long for the days that you could run Ethereum on toasters. Mert, you've been historically very critical of Ethereum, and you've basically said, look, Ethereum's going to take too long to scale. That's why you should just come to Solana today, because Solana is where Ethereum wants to be in 5 years. Okay, now Ethereum is telling a much more aggressive story about scaling. How do you feel like that potentially threatens the Solana story?
Well, as the great philosopher Anatoly Yakovenko once said, he who catches or chases 2 rabbits catches neither. I think that was Confucius. But, I think it's just not enough. Like, if you're going to scale the L1 more than it, and they should, like, I think that's actually a good idea, and we've been kind of screaming about that for a while. And I think it'll be useful, but it's just not going to be enough because, one, it's going to take them time to do that, and that time is non-trivial. And by the time they're doing that, all the other L1s are also going to scale. And that's the only thing they want to do, right? That's their singular North Star. And not even just Solana, but Sui, Monad, L2s as well, because now if you're scaling the L1, you can play these Kumbaya alignment games all you want, but you are competing for execution fees. Like, that is what you're doing. Everybody's doing this. Every single L1, L2 that has execution on it. So I don't think it's going to be enough. And I also don't buy the decentralization thing with regards to node requirements. I think this is like a huge technical misnomer that I don't understand why this mistake keeps getting made. But like, if you actually read Vitalik himself's post on the endgame of Ethereum, he says something like, well, blocks will be produced by specialized entities, right? Maybe, he says centralized block production, which just means like people who are, because it's a skill, you need to be very good at doing that. Today, 95% of blocks on Ethereum are produced by 2 entities, okay? And that's just always going to be the case. Whenever there's money to be made, it's going to be the specialists that get in. Where the home nodes are important is for verification, right? So as a person that has money on this thing and you see the big bad boys are doing something bad, you can actually just see that because you can run the node. You don't have to trust them. And with that in mind, Solana also has a home verification client that's already being developed. And so they actually both have the same end game, but I think Solana is just going to get there faster because there's only one thing to aim at.
Sure. Okay. So another part of this story is the roll-up-centric roadmap, right? This, Kain, you were describing that this was the big gambit that Ethereum played, is that, hey, we're not going to be able to scale, do Ethereum 2.0, do the beam chain, all this stuff in time. And so in the interim, we're going to scale through rollups. It seems like in many ways, a focus on the L1 is a little bit of a retreat from the rollup-centric roadmap, and is saying, hey, we've kind of prioritized the rollups at the expense of prioritizing the L1. Do we think, in retrospect, that the rollup-centric roadmap was a mistake?
I'll actually just start beforehand, but I don't think scaling the L1 is against rollups. I think you actually, so like John Sharp wrote a piece that I also helped edit. The point of the L2 is that, like, if you have an L2 on a ghost chain that's an L1, then what exactly are you extending that's an asset that's useful? Nothing, right? The reason why you, like, for example, L2s on Bitcoin now makes sense too, because you can extend Bitcoin the asset with some trust minimization. Same with ETH the asset, but also all the RWAs and stables that ETH has. And for those assets to exist on that chain, you need to be able to do something with them. You can't be completely passive. And so scaling the L1 has 2 improvements or benefits. One is going to be faster interop, right? You can actually cross-communicate much better. But then also, you have more variety of assets because there's much more activity on L1 to extend to the L2. And I actually also think this is why L2s on Solana will start making sense in like 2 years. Because once you have all that activity...
Be careful, my friend. Be careful.
Network extensions.
Right? So I think call them network extensions, call them pivots, whatever you want. Semantics, right? But the issue is not a technical one in my mind, right? Like, I think from a technical perspective, the roll-up-centric roadmap worked. The unintended consequence of the roll-up-centric roadmap is that we ended up with this asset fragmentation, not just liquidity fragmentation, but asset fragmentation. If you were in the ETH ecosystem, do you buy Arbitrum? Do you buy OP? Do you buy ZK Sync? Which of these assets do you buy? It's not clear to an end user who is mainly transacting on L2s whether or not, like, ETH, the asset that's on that's on L1 that secures mainnet, is the asset you should buy. And that fragmentation and that kind of choice paralysis of, like, which is the investable asset here, I think has done more damage to Ethereum than almost anything. Because price action is very driven by momentum, and the momentum that we see in the ETH price, this negative momentum, I think a lot of that is due to this kind of proliferation of L2 tokens and L2s, and it's problematic. So I think that, to me, is it's not a technical issue.
Let me dig in on this valuation question, because I think there's also core to the question of what went so wrong with Ethereum. If your mental model of the value of Ether is that it's money, and this was a story that Ethereum was telling for a long time, is that we're ultrasound money. If you're money, then perhaps the roll-up centric roadmap makes sense because it's exporting ETH the currency. It's still the case that you pay gas fees on ZK Sync and on Optimism and on Arbitrum using Ether the asset. And so this is like sort of internationalizing the currency. On the other hand, if the business,
but they're shitty economies, right? Like
sure, fine,
you've
fine.
exported
Okay,
it
you
to
can say
like,
that. You can say that.
Yeah.
But if, as Mert mentioned earlier, if the story is about revenue, if the story is about fees, and that's what these things are, they're fundamentally more like equities than they're like currencies, then okay, really we're in the execution business. And outsourcing execution to other roll-ups basically means that you're losing a lot of that revenue, and that's why Ethereum is down bad. Which of these stories, like, do you think one of these two stories has been vindicated?
Well, they're actually related.
They're
right?
related,
How so?
exactly. Yeah.
Because okay, for a currency to be a currency, it needs to be used. And for it to be used, it needs to be usable on top of this, whatever you're using it on. Like if you go to export your currency to a place where there's no stores, or like, there's one store and the line is always 18 billion people, it doesn't matter. That currency is just not going to work because the country is not going to work. So I think like to be used as money to begin with, you need to be just used at scale by many people, and that needs to be consistent. But like the problem is L2s just have different incentives, right? Like, I mean, Base is already spinning out like USDC as a token, for example, right, for gas. And then
That hasn't launched yet.
Sure, but like it is objectively the better user experience.
Right, but that can't explain why ETH has done what it's done so far.
Well, I don't think anything can. I mean, XRP is number 3.
All right.
Yeah, I think like the issue is that you have a lack of demand for ETH the asset, but there's also the fact that the margin in block production has been captured by L2s. Base is super profitable, and L1 isn't, right? And this goes back to this idea: if you had, based rollups or canonical rollups, or if you said, hey, let's print a bunch of ETH, buy back all of these L2 tokens, and just, this is Koppelman's suggestion, just enshrine 12 rollups, right? So, basically at that point you're a sharded blockchain, right? But you enshrine 12 rollups, and 100% of the activity that happened on those rollups go to burning ETH on L1, right? If you re-nationalize the margin that's been lost to L2s, then you could kind of get some of this momentum back into ETH the asset. And I think that unfortunately price action drives the narrative to a significant extent. And so when price action is negative and BTC is outperforming ETH, when was the last time someone talked about the flippening? Right, like that meme, is kind of dead and buried at the moment.
There's a different flippening people talk about now.
I don't talk about it. That's fine.
Yeah. So my point is that like getting some momentum back into ETH, the asset, would generate significant momentum for the narratives. Like some of these narratives are good narratives, scaling to L1, figuring out enshrined rollups or based rollups or something. The overall roadmap. If price action's good, those narratives feel good. If price action's bad, those narratives feel hollow, right? They feel useless. So I just feel like that alone would have a significant impact if we could.
So does that mean then the goal of all of this, of improving the L1, expanding blobs, blah, 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 the real goal is to increase revenue?
Whether you call it revenue or
that's
burning,
still a byproduct at the end of the day. But I feel like, and this is my kind of expectation of what I think is happening. I think what we're seeing in real time is the L1 trying to compete with an L2, and showing you that it's possible to get to like a 80% to 90% compatibility on throughput, and proving that there's actually the ability to actually anywhere from generate revenue to transactions to actually capture that value while still letting others be successful on their own. Because kind of the fragmentation issue is real. If you fundraise for an L2 and you have now expectation for anywhere from your investors to people who are trying to build something on top of you, you kind of want to give them a platform to be successful, but it's not going to be easy for that to still be consistent with where the L1 is going. And those are not, they don't have to be competitive as a zero-sum dynamics, but we are kind of seeing the fact that if I want to go back and re-simulate the NFT kind of bull market era on the L1, can I actually do things sub $3 on transaction fees? And I think that world is like, yes, it's actually possible now on fees, but can I do like hundreds of transactions like that per second soon? And you actually get the ability to say, look, we can choose the destination to be an L2, but we're also saying it's actually possible on the L1 with a slightly smaller premium compared to like how things were 3 years ago. And that's the real bet we're placing here, because we think that the L1 is a good place to be the default for most activity.
Sure.
If somebody gets to a certain threshold, they should branch off to being an L2. But there shouldn't be a case where you have to choose an L2 by default.
Okay.
Okay, so that is a pivot, by the way. Okay, just to be clear.
Reprioritization. So, okay, so Kartik, I have a question for you.
Going back to the original idea, I don't know if that's a pivot technically. But
Yeah. Okay. So let's call it a reprioritization. For Ethereum developers, right? People who are sort of on the inside. How are they feeling about this? When I read Twitter, I see a lot of people who are ETH holders who are down bad. I see a lot of people in other camps throwing rocks and saying, "Oh, look, Ethereum is finally admitting that they're wrong." Is the feeling among developers different? Is it the same? Are they feeling down bad? Are they just like, "Look, reprioritization. What do it's totally cool. This is part of the plan all along."
yeah, I think Twitter is wrong here, which should be no surprise to people who are actually building things. You obviously get sensationalization on Twitter for a bunch of narratives, but when I actually look at the data from how ETHGlobal has been doing for the last 2.5 years, specifically just understanding what the net inflow is for developers, the biggest year for inflow was last year, and I
To
did not
Ethereum or to the EVM broadly?
to Ethereum, which includes L2s,
Okay.
and this is measuring
I'm just saying.
Yeah.
the Ethereum ecosystem, because at the end of the day, people are still learning Solidity, and EVM is still the common factor.
Sure.
But I'm not talking about like if Solana EVM project exists, am I bundling that in? No, I'm talking about specifically kind of the main L2s that you see on Ethereum. There are definitely a bunch of groups. So the first group here that has increased the most last year and over the last 4 months, I have data up to the end of Q1, is the brand new developers who are learning Solidity for the first time. That number has gone up about 30% from 2023, which I personally found surprising because I did not expect that given the sentiment was different last year. The second group is the group of people who are choosing to deploy and actually launch a project on Ethereum or an EVM, and they're default picking an L2. They're not doing it on L1, and that's a massively noticeable trend. You can't refute that. And that's largely because the incentives are now way more powerful on the L2 side because you can get a grant, you can get more funding.
I think this is going to shift, though.
I agree. But I'm just talking about retrospect.
Today.
Yes,
but
100%.
I think it's going to shift. That like the incentives to go to an L2, whether it was token grants or whatever.
Totally agree.
I think that there are a lot of people on L1 who still have the majority of their assets on L1 that want to be able to transact on L1.
Yes.
And I would strongly encourage, whether you're building at a hackathon or you're about to deploy a new project, considering launching on L1, because I think that you will capture a lot of mind share, and particularly if you're doing something with liquidity, because that's where the whales are. They're still on L1. So I think this will shift and is already shifting.
I agree. And the other thing is, like, people who are building products actually have to think about future-proofing their own future here, which is, well, if I'm betting on an L2 and the L2 doesn't survive, what happens to my ecosystem, my product? And those questions are still unanswered because we haven't seen a full cycle of what it means to be a successful or an unsuccessful L2. Sure. But the third camp, which is what you see on Twitter, is like, okay, if I'm a founder and I really want to build a project and I know that I have a great team and a great product, do I pick Ethereum or Solana or some other chain? And whether it's an incentive-driven decision or a technical possibility of like what I can do in these ecosystems, that's kind of where a good decision is being made by a lot of founders. And what we see that comes off as, oh, they're picking Solana over Ethereum or an L2 is what you look on Twitter. But what's actually happening is people are saying, where do I get users for my product? And they don't have to have an allegiance to a chain. Sure. To be successful, and that's kind of what you see.
Okay, so to that point,
Yeah.
one of the weird parts of this whole story is that by scaling the L1, you're creating more block supply. Right now, there's more room on the L1. But I think it was Wei Dai from 1KX who pointed out that actually gas fees on Ethereum are at basically a historical low.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like it's really cheap to transact right now on Ethereum mainnet. Which would that not imply that the problem is not a supply problem, but a demand problem? and that Ethereum has lost a bunch of the demand. So scaling supply, why is that the right answer?
Well, I think L1.
Maybe just to context, like that is just from the last 4 weeks. So if you're expecting a company just pop up and things to
No, but it is a trend, right? It's
Yes.
been a long-standing trend for a year or whatever, right? Like, I mean, I remember sub 1 Gwei, in 2016 and being like
before NFTs. Yeah.
before NFTs, right? And I would have bet, I don't know, millions of dollars, right, in 2021 that you would never get back sub 1, right? So it is, for me, as a longtime builder on Ethereum, pretty astounding, the situation that we're in. And I think that is representative of all of the activity went off to L2s, and we did scale block space by allowing blob space to increase and getting more efficiency in the L2s. And that has created an opportunity, I think, for projects to come back to L1. Of course, there's a risk, right? If you go back to L1 and we get congestion again, and all of a sudden it's $5, $10, $20 to transact, that's going to be problematic. So you need a hedge. But I think the first movers to come back to L1, of which Synthetics is one. We've got in our roadmap now moving back to L1, and we were the first people to go to OP. So directionally, it's really the momentum shifted.
So the plan is for Synthetics to come back to L1?
Yeah.
When?
ASAP.
ASAP?
Yeah, we're going to
So
launch
you're like,
perps.
this is long-term, this is a safe move for us.
Well, so this is the funny thing, right? Like, we went to OP because you couldn't do perps on L1 back in 2020, 2019, 2020.
Because
It was
of latency
impossible.
or because of cost?
Latency and cost and everything, and now the technology has gotten much better, and you can do perps on L1, and no one's tried it. And so,
And you have a you have a pretty high probability that it's going to get cheaper over time, given what we know, which
exactly.
is a fair directional bet you can take.
Exactly. So, and realistically with perps, you obviously want cheap transactions, but even if they're $1, on notional $10,000, $50,000, $100,000 trades,
People are
$1
okay
is
with that.
fine. You can factor that into the spreads and overall fees. So yeah, we're like, let's go back to L1. 5 years later.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Come back home.
That's very bullish.
Yeah.
Okay. So one last part of the pivot we have not talked about, beyond UX and interoperability and all this stuff, the one part we haven't talked about is vibes. And that feels also like a big part of the pivot. Vibes. Vibes, right? So historically, the Ethereum vibe has been, tending the infinite garden. It's been, we talk about research and academia and Verkle trees and ZK-ifying the blockchain. And last time I've heard the word Verkle tree was like, months ago. Now we're talking about scaling the L1, talking about replicating Superteam, and there's less of a focus on just purely decentralization, and more kind of coming to Solana's camp, which is actually it's about users. Mert, what is your take on this vibes pivot? Do you think it's real? Do you think it's superficial? And do you think it's enough?
Okay, well, do I think it's real?
Do you think it's real?
Okay, I think Ethereum is a diverse community, right? I think for some people, like for example, these two gentlemen, real. For Dankrad,
everyone on stage today, let's all
for
agree.
Dankrad, it's probably real. Okay, like the people who actually kind of know what they're doing, it's real. For Bankless, absolutely not.
Oof.
Okay,
Wait, what do you have against Bankless?
the podcast industrial complex who just changes their minds anytime the core dev says anything. That's not real. They're just scaling megaphones for nonsense. Okay.
Damn.
And so I don't think that's. So it really depends. I think for some people, like Justin Drake, like he's been asking me questions and whatnot. So from like way back, I know those guys are actually interested in improving. So like that's what you need. Is it enough? I mean, enough for what? I guess is the real question. I think like certainly there's an overcorrection on how down bad ETH is. I think it's just like a very easy meme. So it's just people are just like piling up on it. People. But
Unnamed people.
I think ETH will be fine. I don't think there's like this crazy existentialist.
ETH the asset or Ethereum the network?
Oh, the network. I don't know anything about assets. Again, we're flipped by XRP and BNB.
True.
And
True.
probably even Cardano at some point. So like, I don't know anything about assets, but like I think the network itself will be okay. And fundamentally, all that matters in the end game, whenever that is the use case, right? So like, for example, let's take the perps thing as an example. It's like, okay, if you are a perps trader or like somebody who wants to build perps, are you going to build on ETH1 or are you going to build on Hyperliquid? Okay, that's probably not that much of a decision. Or like if you're building an order book, are you going to build it on ETH? Like it just really depends very strongly on the use case. And to answer any of these questions, you need to know which use cases will actually be, let's say, adopted at scale. And I don't think we have that answer. Like stables for sure, but stables work on any chain. So I think it's too early to tell, but I think there's certainly an overreaction to how much, let's say, ETH is down. So I think they'll, come back, so to say. Now, that being said, Solana will keep accelerating, right? Like it's not like we're just going to be like, oh, let's just watch them come back and fail. It's like, no, we're just going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doubling down, actually. We like competition. But again, I want to be very clear that I think the podcast industrial complex vibes are.
You were very clear on that.
Yeah, you were clear. We got
that being misunderstood.
So I think in terms of the vibes, right? Like this is it for people who maybe haven't been here for multiple cycles. There has always been a tension between the flowers and rainbows wing of Ethereum, right, and the people building decentralized finance. There's one guy who sits in the middle, who I won't name, who's kind of the person who kind of mediates between those two. But the flowers and rainbows are dead. Like it's that whole like
WF soy boy complex.
Like the non-commercial, let's all lose together vibe. Like it's done. It was always retarded, and it's done. And I think that the people who built DeFi and were building DeFi for the last 7, 8, 9 years are sick of it. Last year, we all kind of stood up and said, this is not okay. You need to acknowledge that DeFi is the one thing that has kept Ethereum relevant. If you take away DeFi, it's over.
It's
right?
actually worked, yeah.
It's worked. It's scaled. You've got people like Stanny who've been building for a long time. Like they're holding the chain together. They're the only ones who are creating demand for block space. And those people are the ones you should listen to.
Wait, you're talking about Vitalik?
Sorry?
Who are you talking about?
I was talking about Hayden. I think Hayden kind of sits in between, right? The unicorn vibes and stuff. But at the same time, Hayden is also building a business, right? He's building something that is supposed to generate revenue, is supposed to get adoption, is supposed to have distribution. He gets it, and he's been grinding hard doing that. I think he also has like a soft spot for the pseudo communism on the other side. But like,
that's what it is, yeah.
It is. It really is. We should be competing with people. It's wild to be like, no, let's all, just get along, right? Like we should be absolutely competing with people in the Ethereum community.
Dude, pseudo-communist is crazy.
Jeez. Okay. So hold on. So we're at time. Yeah. So I just want to wrap with a quick turbo round. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you agree with the statement? ETH BTC has bottomed.
I love pain.
You got it.
I have no idea.
You think it's flat? You think it stays flat?
I have no idea.
You have no idea. All right, fine.
Yeah.
ETH Sol has bottomed.
I don't know.
Okay. No confidence. Okay. And then last, now's a good time to short roll-ups. Short roll-ups. Go short the roll-ups.
How?
Yeah?
Yeah.
What do you mean how? They're tokens.
No.
Oh, those are
no.
useless
Down.
anyways.
Thumbs down.
Yeah.
Thumbs.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, regardless.
All right. You've got some financial advice from the folks here on stage. With that, we're going to wrap. Thank you guys for a spirited discussion.